The air in Manzanillo that night was thick with salt and smoke. I crouched behind a crumbling seawall across from the beach hotel, clutching the radio so hard it felt like my bones might snap. 3 in the morning, and the avenue exploded with gunfire that rattled the glass towers above us. Bullets clattered off metal railings like hailstones in a storm. Grenades lit the night so bright that for seconds at a time, it felt like sunrise had arrived, only to plunge us back into the dark roar of rifles. "Maintain position," the voice ordered through my earpiece, calm as stone. I swallowed the taste of iron and forced my voice steady. Movement confirmed. 2 bodies dragged 3 vehicles repositioning. My words trembled more than my hands. Each phrase I spoke into the radio carried the weight of death, because somewhere in that chaos, men lived or died depending on what I said. Behind me, the Pacific rolled in indifferent waves, crashing in rhythm with the staccato of AK-47s. I thought of the first day I ever held a radio like this, just a skinny 16-year-old in Jalisco trying to keep his family fed. Back then, they told me it was harmless work. Watch the streets report the soldiers earn enough pesos to keep my mother from breaking her back in the market. They didn't tell me that one day I'd be here in the middle of a war, disguised as a city, reporting the exact second when enemies took their last breath. The windows of the hotel shattered outward in a rain of glass. Shadows moved inside men, screaming rifles, snapping bursts that echoed down the boulevard. I pressed lower, my chest grinding into the wet pavement. The radio hissed again. "No survivors. Copy." I froze. Those words weren't about defending territory anymore. They were a command for extermination. "Copy," I whispered, though my throat felt carved out with glass. As the gunfire raged, my mind betrayed me with flashes of memory. My mother's hands raw from carrying baskets. My little brother, waiting outside school the day I was taken. The look in my sister's eyes when I slipped money into her bag, pretending it came from extra work at the market. Lies wrapped around my family like barbed wire. And now, every shot in the night pulled the wire tighter. I should have been inside a classroom, not outside a burning hotel. I should have been asleep in my own bed, not counting bodies through the crossfire. But by then, should no longer existed. There was only obey or die. That was the creed El Mencho had carved into us the first day he looked into our eyes. A blast shook the seawall dust choking my lungs. I pressed my forehead to the concrete and made myself a promise. One day, I would tell everything, every radio code, every corpse, every secret they thought was buried. Because the world still believes the war was about plazas and borders. They think Mencho was just a ruthless king of territory. But they are wrong. I was there. I saw the other faces in the shadows, the men in suits who smiled while entire towns burned. And I will tell you who they were. Because the true owners of our lives were not always the ones carrying rifles. My name has no importance. What matters is where I came from, because that's where the trap was set long before the black truck stopped for me outside my school. Jalisco, 2010. A place where the sun burned harder than hope and poverty gnawed at our bones like a dog that never tired. My father had already disappeared by then, gone chasing another woman or another promise, and he never returned. My mother carried us on her shoulders, me, my little brother, and my younger sister. She rose before dawn each day to haul crates of fruit and vegetables in the market. Her palms were carved with lines of toil so deep they looked like open wounds. By evening, she would come home with just enough pesos to cover tortillas, beans, and maybe a piece of chicken if luck had smiled. I hated watching her body bend under that weight, knowing I could not relieve her. I was the oldest, the one who was supposed to fill the absence my father had left. Instead, I spent afternoons watching my siblings play, while inside I simmered with shame. Each time my brother asked for new shoes, Each time my sister dreamed about a school uniform without holes, I felt like I had failed them. The streets around us weren't empty. They were alive with men in trucks. Young guys who dressed sharper than any teacher, gold chains flashing in the sun, radios crackling like a lifeline. The letters CJNG were whispered the way priests whisper prayers. They controlled everything: which songs blasted from stereos at parties, which shops paid rent, which alleys you avoided if you wanted to see another sunrise. For us kids, the cartel wasn't an idea, it was the weather. You breathed it, sweated it, lived under it. By 16, I was already standing at a crossroads without even knowing it. School was a place of mocking chalkboards, teachers who looked at me with tired eyes, knowing my future wouldn't stretch past their classroom walls. Jobs. The only work for a boy like me was carrying crates until your back snapped, or cleaning windshields at stoplights until a cop kicked your ribs in. So when hunger pressed harder, my ears grew sharper. I noticed the way people stepped aside when the trucks rolled in. I noticed how men who had nothing suddenly had everything: phones, watches, girls' respect. I noticed how fear bent the knees of even the strongest. And I listened because hunger teaches you to listen. One afternoon, I was waiting outside my brother's school when the hum of a black Chevy Tahoe crawled into my chest. It stopped where the sidewalk cracked. 2 men stepped out. One was tall, covered in tattoos, eyes shining like blades. The other was younger, quiet, with a stare so cold it drilled through my skin. "Orale Moro," the tattooed one said. "What's your name?" My mouth went dry. When men like that asked, there were only 2 possibilities. They wanted you, or they wanted you gone. I gave my name, almost choking on it. He smiled, not like a friend, but like a man who had just opened a cage. We need kids who know the streets, eyes that don't blink at danger, want to make some money. Money. That word snapped inside me like a trap. 100 pesos a week, more with bonuses. Enough to ease my mother's pain, enough to feed my brother and sister. For a boy who had never seen more than a handful of coins in his pocket, it sounded like salvation. "You don't have to do anything bad," the younger one assured me, voice like ice. "Just report if you see soldiers, federales, anyone strange. Easy job. And we take care of you." It was a lie, of course. But at 16, lies dressed as miracles looked like the only doors left standing. That night, I stared at the ceiling of our one-room house, listening to the rhythm of my mother's breath, the quiet snores of my brother, the soft dreams of my sister. I told myself I would take the job just for a while, just until things got better. I didn't know then that just for a while can stretch into a lifetime, or that the next step would take me to a rancho outside Zapopan, where I would come face to face with a man whose shadow covered the entire state. The next morning, I waited at the corner where the Tahoe had stopped. The tattooed man, people called him El Toro, leaned out the window and jerked his chin toward the back seat. I climbed in, pressing myself against the cold leather heart, hammering so hard I thought they would hear it. Beside me sat 2 other boys younger than me, their eyes wide, but silent. Nobody spoke. Silence was the first lesson. We drove through the city until skyscrapers gave way to fields and dusty roads curling into the hills. The air grew heavier with the smell of diesel and sweat. When the trucks turned onto a dirt road, I realized this was no neighborhood stop. We were heading for something bigger. The rancho appeared suddenly sprawling behind iron gates, encircled by mountains like a fortress carved into the land. Dozens of trucks, Suburbans, pickups, even armored vehicles were lined up like soldiers. Armed men stood at every corner, their rifles glinting in the sun. No uniforms, just jeans and boots, but their eyes were sharper than any soldier's. We were ordered out, lined up beneath a mesquite tree, whose shade did nothing against the brutal heat. The other recruits avoided my gaze, each of us pretending not to notice the fear etched on our faces. Minutes stretched like hours until another truck rolled in larger black glass, reflecting the blinding sky. When the doors opened, the air itself seemed to tighten. He stepped out without hurry. A man of average height, skin darkened by the sun, mustache-trimmed denim shirt tucked into worn jeans. But it wasn't his clothes that mattered, it was his presence. His eyes didn't scan the ground, they pierced it. When his gaze landed on you, it felt like standing naked in the middle of a storm. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho. He walked the line, slowly pausing at each boy, measuring us without a word. When his stare locked on me, I couldn't breathe. Seconds dragged into eternity before he moved on. Finally, he spoke, voice calm, almost gentle. Welcome. Here we don't play games. Here you serve or you fall. Behind him, El Toro barked out the rules: loyalty without question, without exception, obedience without hesitation. Mistakes cost blood, yours or your family's. No one doubted he meant it. A radio was shoved into my hand, the plastic heavy as iron. They taught us codes: green for military, white for federales, red for rivals. Simple colors, but each one meant life or death. My call sign was Águila Tres. I repeated it in my head like a prayer. My first assignment came that same night. El Toro drove me to the edge of Zapotlanejo, a highway running black under the stars. Stand here. Report everything. Every hour say it's clear unless it isn't. Don't miss. Don't move. Don't speak to anyone. So I stood, backpack over my shoulders, like any student waiting for a bus, earpiece tucked inside my collar. Every 60 minutes, I pressed the button and whispered, Águila Tres. All clear. A voice would respond, low and steady, copy, stay sharp. The first nights passed in eerie calm. Cars whooshed by, people went about their lives, never knowing a teenager was silently measuring their world for the cartel. But then, the calm cracked. One night, I watched 3 trucks screech to a halt in front of a warehouse. 10 armed men spilled out, dragging another man by his wrists. His face was beaten, his hands tied. They shoved him inside. Minutes later, screams ripped through the walls, the kind of screams that split bone. I stayed frozen, every muscle turned to stone. I didn't need to see what happened. The sound was enough. That night when I got home, my mother asked why I was pale. I told her it was school troubles. I couldn't tell her that her son had already become part of a machine that chewed men alive. I thought I was still just a lookout, an observer, a boy holding a radio. But standing on that road listening to those screams, I understood. I had already crossed the line, and there was no turning back. At dawn, the recruits were gathered once more beneath the mesquite tree. Dust swirled around our boots, and the heat pressed down like punishment. El Toro stood before us, arms crossed, watching our every twitch. Then, like a shadow falling over the land, he arrived again. El Mencho. He didn't need banners or music. His presence was its own ceremony. He looked at us one by one, his gaze steady as though he was engraving our names into his private ledger. Then he spoke low and deliberate, each word heavy as stone. Absolute loyalty, total silence, military discipline. He let the words hang in the dry air. If one betrays, he dies. If one betrays, his family dies. This is not a threat, it is the sun rising tomorrow. We stood still, not even daring to swallow. Behind him, El Toro repeated the commandments: no questions, no excuses, no weakness. We were soldiers now, whether we wore uniforms or not. Soldiers who owed their lives not to a country, but to a man. Then came the test. We were driven out in pairs to isolated corners of the city. My task was to hold a street near El Salto, a warehouse district known for silence too heavy to be natural. Report every 10 minutes, El Toro ordered. Don't miss, or you'll answer for it. I stood alone on a corner, pretending to wait for a bus, a cheap candy in my hand, the radio hidden in my backpack. At first, it was easy. I whispered updates received the same monotone confirmation and kept my eyes open. But as the sun bled into the horizon, a convoy rolled up. Trucks screeched to a halt, men jumped out, rifles gleaming. They dragged a man from one of the buildings, wrists tied, mouth gagged. His body was broken before they even began. I wanted to turn away, but I couldn't. The first blow made him drop like a sack. The second left him still. By the third, he was no longer a man, just a warning. I knew what my orders were. Observe, report, stay silent. So I pressed the button, voice hollow. Águila tres. Movement confirmed. Neutralized. The voice in my ear replied, copy. No emotion, no pause. Like death was just another entry in a logbook. That night when I returned to our house, my mother asked why my hands shook as I reached for food. I told her I was tired from schoolwork. She didn't press me. I thanked God she didn't. The next morning, El Toro pulled me aside. His smile was sharp, a predator's grin. You did good, Moro. You didn't flinch. That's how you survive here. He clapped my shoulder, and in that moment, I knew I had passed. From then on, I wasn't just another recruit. I was part of them. The induction was not marked by tattoos or oaths in blood, but by silence kept and lies swallowed. My first test wasn't about courage. It was about obedience. They didn't want men who thought. They wanted eyes that saw, mouths that reported, and hands that didn't shake when the world turned red. And I had just proven I could be exactly that. But inside, a part of me began to rot. Because when you watch a man beaten into silence and say nothing, you're not a bystander. You're complicit. And no amount of candy or excuses can wash the blood off your tongue. The radio became my heartbeat. Every morning, I slipped the earpiece beneath my shirt collar. Every night, I whispered codes into the dark. Green meant soldiers. White meant federales. Red meant rivals. Simple colors that now painted my world in blood. At first, the missions were routine. Stand on corners near San Juan de Dios, lean against a wall in Tepatitlan, buy candy to look like a kid killing time. My words into the radio were always the same, Águila Trio, all clear. For weeks, I convinced myself I was just an observer, a pair of eyes. But the truth was waiting. It only takes one night for the mask to fall. That night came in Tepalcatepec. I had been ordered to watch the northern road, nothing unusual. But just before dusk, the ground began to shake with engines. 10 trucks roared into view, packed with Sicarios' rifles, jutting from windows like thorns. My stomach dropped. I pressed the button. Base Águila Tres. Code red. 10 units direction north. The reply was instant. Copy. Maintain position. I wanted to run, but training and fear chained me. Minutes later, the plaza erupted. CJNG convoys arrived, engines screaming, and the two storms collided. Gunfire split the air like lightning. Explosions thundered. Civilians screamed and scrambled, shops slammed their shutters. I pressed myself against a food stand, reporting what I could. 3 trucks advancing, 2 down, bodies on the road. Hours passed like years. When silence finally returned, 20 corpses lay in the dust. Among them were 2 boys my age, their eyes frozen wide toward the sky. I couldn't move. It could have been me. That night, El Guero, the veteran assigned as my coordinator, patted my back. "Good work, Moro. You kept the line." His words tasted like poison. Keeping the line meant watching kids die while I spoke codes into static. From then on, the work deepened. I was sent to shadow warehouses, follow suspicious convoys, guard intersections before shipments. Once I was ordered to stand outside a house in Apatzingan. Hours passed quietly until 2 trucks rolled up. The men who poured out weren't locals. Templarios. Rivals. I whispered into the radio. Code red, 2 vehicles armed. Within minutes, CJNG trucks swarmed the block. Gunfire exploded. Windows shattered, the house ignited in flames. I crouched behind a crumbling wall, radio shaking in my grip. The smell of burning flesh clung to the night. When it was over, the street was littered with bodies and ashes. That was the moment I realized the lie of being just a lookout. My silence guided the blood. My codes opened the door. At home, I stared at myself in the mirror, searching for the boy who had once worried about homework and family dinners. Instead, I saw eyes that refused to blink, a face learning to harden. To keep going, I had to believe the story I told myself. I wasn't pulling the trigger. I wasn't the one giving orders. I was helping my family survive. But lies rot fast. Soon I was paid bonuses, more pesos than I had ever imagined. Enough to buy new shoes for my brother, notebooks for my sister, medicine for my mother. I told myself the money was clean once it reached their hands. But deep down, I knew it dripped red. By the end of that year, I no longer flinched at gunfire. My pulse stayed steady during executions. When El Guero said I was reliable, I felt pride instead of shame. The boy who once wanted only to escape poverty had been replaced. I was no longer just a pair of eyes. I was part of the machine. And the machine never stops once it tastes your loyalty. Promotion in the cartel didn't come with medals or ceremonies. It came with trust, measured in blood and silence. By the time I turned 17, El Guero no longer sent me to stand alone on corners. Now, I was part of a mesh, a living web, stretched across Jalisco, Michoacán, and Colima. "You're not just eyes anymore, Moro," he told me one night, handing me a newer radio with encrypted channels. "You're the thread. If you break, the net rips." My world expanded. No longer confined to a single street or highway, I was moving across entire towns. Coordinating halcons, relaying reports, mapping rival convoys in real time. At first, the responsibility felt crushing, but soon I discovered a dangerous rush in it, the power of being the first to know. The first to warn, the voice that guided dozens of rifles into position. The war was burning hotter. In Michoacán, the Caballeros Templarios fought to the last breath. In Guanajuato, the Santa Rosa de Lima cartel defended its land like it was religion. Each plaza was a battlefield where every block meant money control and routes. Every meter of dirt is worth gold, commanders told us, and we believed them. I saw my first training camp in the hills outside Tepalcatepec. It wasn't like an army barracks, but a collection of ranchos strung together with dirt tracks. Men ran drills with AR-15s, learned ambush tactics, practiced discipline like soldiers. Recruits who faltered were beaten in front of everyone. One boy tried to run, his body was left hanging from a tree as a warning. That image followed me into every dream. Still, the rewards dazzled. I rode in armored trucks, ate meat sizzling on grills, while music blasted from speakers, drank beer with men twice my age who treated me as an equal. For the first time, I felt important. Money came faster now, thick bundles of bills handed to me like candy. I bought my mother a washing machine, told her it came from a warehouse job. She cried with gratitude, never guessing the truth. But with power came darker shadows. I sat in houses of security where maps of entire states lay pinned with markers. We weren't just guarding plazas, we were advancing consuming, and behind every advance was a voice, El Mencho's. Sometimes he sent recorded messages, other times his commanders spoke for him. The message was always the same: not 1 centimeter surrendered, not 1 traitor forgiven. There were nights when he appeared in person. Once in Tepalcatepec, he stepped out of a truck as if the earth itself bowed. He looked at us, rows of halcón sicarios, coordinators, and declared, "This land will decide who commands Michoacán. If anyone here is afraid to die, walk away now." None of us moved. We knew leaving wasn't a choice. Staying was survival. From then on, I carried more than a radio. I carried command over corners, shifts, voices. I became someone others depended on. El Güero said I had steel nerves because I never broke during firefights, never missed a report. What he didn't see was how my insides screamed every night when I closed my eyes. I told myself I was climbing, but climbing in the cartel is like scaling a ladder without rungs behind you. Every step up is another you can't go down. The higher you go, the more certain the fall will kill you. Still, I kept climbing. Not because I wanted glory, but because the machine left no room for standing still. In the CJNG, staying in one place meant you were already marked for death. And so I rose an invisible thread in a web that spanned entire states, caught between fear and pride too high to look down, too deep to ever climb back out. Life inside the CJNG was a paradox, brotherhood laced with suspicion, loyalty poisoned by fear. On the surface, we were a family. We ate together, partied together, toasted each other under neon lights, while banda music rattled the walls. But beneath the noise was silence, a silence heavier than any gun, because we all knew the rules. And the rules were carved sharper than bullets. El Toro reminded us every week. The first law is silence. The second law is loyalty. The third is discipline. Break one, and the others break you. Punishment was not rumor. It was spectacle. I saw a boy my age, a halcón like me, dragged before us for missing a report. They tied him to a chair in the middle of a warehouse, made us watch as they broke his fingers one by one. His screams echoed through the corrugated roof until his voice gave out. Later, his body was found floating in a canal. The message was clear: the organization devoured its own mistakes. And yet, they dressed our cage with velvet. Birthdays were celebrated with feasts, roasted meat, expensive liquor women brought in like decorations. For a few hours, laughter drowned out the war. But even in those moments, glances darted across the room, each man calculating who might one day betray him. The duality hollowed me. In the morning, I delivered reports like a soldier. At night, I clinked bottles with men whose smiles hid daggers. We were bound by an oath none of us had chosen, but all of us had accepted: obey or die. One memory never left me. We were stationed near Villagran at a gas station gone dark after sunset. Orders were to report rival movement. Hours ticked by in tense quiet until headlights appeared, 2 trucks, no plates, creeping along the old road. I whispered into the radio, "Gavilan 4, 2 units direction north." Command replied, "Copy. Do not intervene." Minutes later, our convoy arrived. 4 trucks swept in with lights dimmed. The firefight was swift, merciless. I ducked behind a rusted sign, forcing myself to keep reporting positions. When silence returned, a woman emerged from the shadows holding the hand of a little girl. They had come from the store carrying bread and milk. A nervous recruit cocked his rifle by reflex. The click echoed louder than the gunfire before it. The child screamed, groceries tumbled across the pavement. El Toro shoved the weapon down, snarling. The convoy rolled on. The woman and her daughter sat on the curb trembling. They weren't hit, but terror clung to them like ash. I watched from the shadows, unable to breathe. That moment branded me deeper than any party, any oath. Because it proved what I had been trying to deny: there was no clean war. Even silence made you complicit. Back in the safe house, El Güero congratulated us. "Good work, Moros. Plaza secure." I nodded, but inside I was collapsing. The organization called itself a family, but what family feeds on fear? What family parades loyalty while plotting betrayal? Still I stayed. I had no choice. By then, the CJNG owned my nights, my breath, my very thoughts. Each day, I woke up with the same truth burning in me: I belonged to a family that would eat me alive the moment I faltered. The longer I stayed inside, the clearer the truth became. The war for the plazas wasn't just fought with rifles. It was fought with signatures, stamps, and handshakes behind polished desks. Manzanillo was where I first understood this. The port was a kingdom disguised as concrete, and Crane's containers stacked like monuments to greed. To outsiders, it was just commerce. To us, it was the artery that pumped life into the cartel. Ships came from Asia loaded with chemicals, the kind used in clandestine labs, tucked away in the mountains. Every container passed smoothly through customs, thanks to papers signed by judges and notaries who had already sold their loyalty. El Tío, a grizzled operator who had survived longer than most, stood beside me once, as we watched a convoy of trucks roll out of the port. "Moro," he said, "chewing a toothpick out here, you don't fire much. But more people die just slower. Every container is worth more than 1,000 bullets. Every judge's pen is stronger than a grenade." His words haunted me, because I had already seen it. In Colima, a judge had ordered the release of 3 of our captured operators, not only freed them, but destroyed the case files, so it was as if they never existed. Another time, a federal patrol stopped one of our convoys. I thought we were finished. Instead, the officers shook hands with our commander and even escorted us part of the way, like loyal escorts. That was the day my stomach turned. How do you escape a war when even the law wears your enemy's colors? I began to hear names whispered over the radio: politicians, generals, businessmen, men whose faces never appeared on wanted posters, but who held the keys to our survival. They were the invisible owners. Men who never dirtied their hands with gunpowder, yet fed the fire with signatures and cash. I remembered one night at a safe house near Celaya. A man in a crisp suit arrived, briefcase in hand. He wasn't armed, but everyone stood straighter when he walked in. He spoke of court orders, suspensions, amparos that would shield us from raids scheduled the next morning. "You handle your business at night," he said with a smirk. "I'll handle mine during the day." Then he laughed. Nobody else did. In that moment, I realized the battlefield stretched far beyond the plazas. It reached into courtrooms, police stations, even government offices. And if El Mencho was the ghost that haunted Mexico's streets, these men in suits were the ones who gave the ghost its power. Still, the orders never changed: defend every inch, never retreat. In Guanajuato, we burned through villages loyal to Santa Rosa de Lima. Entire rancherias turned into war zones. At dawn, the fields were littered with casings, houses smoldering. Commanders justified it as strategy, but I couldn't forget the faces of civilians caught in the crossfire. My reports continued. My radio crackled. But now, every code I whispered carried a heavier weight because I knew the decisions weren't only coming from men with rifles. They were coming from judges who stamped papers, politicians who smiled on TV, and businessmen whose children studied abroad, while mine hid under tables. That's when the illusion of being part of a family shattered completely. We weren't fighting for survival or loyalty. We were pawns in a game drawn by invisible hands. And the more I climbed inside the organization, the more I felt the strings tightening around my neck. Collapse does not arrive with a warning. It arrives like a storm that seems distant, then suddenly tears the roof from above you. For me, it began with a hotel in Manzanillo. The night was humid, the streets slick with sea air. Our orders were simple. Observe a meeting of Sinaloa operators, rumored to be plotting against the port. El Tío placed me with 2 other halcones at a vantage point across the avenue. "Keep your mouths shut unless you see movement," he said. "The convoy is close." At 3 in the morning, black trucks slid up to the hotel entrance. Men spilled out armed to the teeth. My breath caught as I pressed the radio. "Base Gavilan 4. Movement confirmed." The reply was sharp. "Hold. Do not intervene." Minutes later, the CJNG convoy arrived. Engines roared, lights dimmed, rifles lifted. The avenue erupted in a storm of fire. Grenades shattered windows, turning the hotel into a lantern of smoke and flame. Civilians screamed. Glass rained onto the pavement. I crouched behind a palm tree, choking on dust, reporting through a throat that barely worked. Then came the order that broke me. No survivors. It wasn't about controlling the plaza anymore, it was about erasing it. I watched shadows dragged into trucks, bodies left in the street, flames licking the night sky. And for the first time, I didn't feel fear or adrenaline. I felt emptiness, a hollow so deep it threatened to swallow me. When dawn came, I returned to the safe house trembling. El Güero patted my back. "Buen trabajo, Morro. The plaza is ours." I nodded, but inside something snapped. That wasn't work. That was slaughter. From that night, paranoia wrapped itself around me like a second skin. Every sound of a truck on the street made me flinch. Every knock on the door felt like a death sentence. I began to dream of escape, the thought whispering to me each time I saw another recruit vanish, another brother turned into an example. The breaking point came weeks later on a convoy headed toward Michoacán. We stopped at a gas station for fuel. I reported a radio malfunction, stepping a few meters away under the pretext of fixing it. My pulse hammered so loud I thought they would hear it. Then, without turning back, I walked into the dark highway. Every step felt like a bullet waiting to strike me down. But no shout came, no rifle fired. Perhaps they were distracted, or perhaps fate gave me one chance. I reached the road, flagged down a passing bus to Guadalajara, and sank into the back seat, heart racing. For the first time in years, I breathed air that didn't stink of gunpowder. But freedom was only a word. In reality, I had traded one prison for another. In Guadalajara, I hid in cheap hotels, moving every 3 nights. I found work hauling sacks in a night market, muscles screaming, hands blistered, but at least the money was honest. Still, every siren outside sent me under the bed. Every ring of a phone made my blood freeze. Because you don't just leave the CJNG. You disappear from them, or they make you disappear. And the more I looked over my shoulder, the more I realized the cartel's shadow stretched everywhere, in the streets, in the courts, even in my nightmares. The collapse wasn't just of my role in the organization. It was the collapse of every illusion I had clung to, the illusion of family, of loyalty, of survival. All that remained was the truth. I was a ghost marked by the very machine I had once helped build. I never imagined survival could feel so much like imprisonment. On paper, I was free, no more radios buzzing in my ear, no more orders barked by men who lived like gods and died like dogs. But the truth is, the war followed me long after I walked away from that gas station. Every morning, I woke to the same dread, a black truck idling outside, a knock on the door that never came. I changed hotels so often, I forgot what my own reflection looked like. My nights were worse dreams, filled with the Hotel Inferno in Manzanillo, with the little girl screaming at a gas station, with the blank stare of two boys my age, sprawled lifeless on a street in Tepalcatepec. I woke drenched in sweat, the smell of gunpowder still clinging to my nostrils, though the only smoke nearby came from street vendors frying meat. To stay sane, I began to write. At first, it was scattered notes, codes, call signs, the names of plazas, and the operators who commanded them. But soon it turned into whole pages stories that spilled out faster than I could contain them. I filled notebooks with memories I could not share aloud. Each word felt like a wound reopened, but also like a breath I could finally take. Sometimes I wondered if writing was enough, because no matter how many sentences I wrote, the ghosts did not leave. They sat with me at every meal, followed me through every alley, whispered through every police siren that wailed in the distance. I tried to live. I found work in markets, later in a small garage where I learned to fix engines. I even met people who offered kindness, a coworker inviting me to dinner, a woman selling food who smiled at me without suspicion. But I couldn't accept their kindness without choking on guilt. How could I sit at a family table when I had seen families erased? How could I smile at a woman when my hands still shook with memories of the lives I'd helped destroy? I realized then what true punishment was. Not prison, not even death. True punishment is survival with memory. To walk the streets every day carrying secrets too heavy to tell, to smile while hiding a past that would terrify anyone who looked too closely. So these words is my confession. Not to a judge, not to the police, not even to my mother, who still believes I worked warehouse jobs in those missing years. This confession is for whoever still believes there is glory in being a halcón, whoever thinks fast money is worth the chains it binds you with. There is no glory, only ghosts. The world still thinks El Mencho is just a name, just another narco legend. But I tell you this, he was not only a man. He was a shadow cast over everything: streets, mountains, ports, courts. His power lived in the rifles of teenagers and in the signatures of judges who smiled while selling justice. He was a phantom that rewrote the rules of Mexico, and we, the halcones, were his disposable eyes. My name does not matter. What matters is this warning: once you step inside that machine, it does not let you go. You can run, but you will never stop looking over your shoulder. You can escape, but the war will follow you into every dream. If these words reach even one young kid tempted to join, let them hear me. The fast money dries up, the power crumbles, the family devours its own. And in the end, all that remains is what I am now, one more ghost of the war, for the plazas whispering into the void, begging someone to listen before the silence swallows them too.